You are a liability and a fraud. Get her out of my building now." Victor Pemberton screamed, his face turning a violent shade of purple. He jabbed a manicured finger inches from Dr. Alexis Harper's nose, spraying spittle. A police officer stepped forward, grabbing Alexis's shoulder and spinning her around. The cold steel of handcuffs clicked onto her wrists. She didn't struggle. She didn't beg. She simply stared at Victor with an icy, lethal precision that made the watching nurses shiver. "You're finished, Harper. I'll see your license revoked before sunset," Victor spat, adjusting his suit jacket. But just as the officer shoved Alexis toward the exit, the police radio strapped to his chest let out a deafening screech of static. It wasn't a dispatch call. It was an override frequency that hadn't been used since 9/11. A voice boomed from the radio carrying absolute, terrifying authority: "Code Black override. Secure the asset immediately." The officer froze, his hand trembling on Alexis's arm. "This is the Pentagon," the voice commanded. "The woman you are detaining is the property of the United States government. Release her or face federal prosecution." Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now let's get into the story. The corridors of Mercy General hummed with the sterile fluorescent quiet of 3 a.m., the hour where mistakes happen and bodies give out. Dr. Alexis Harper, a first-year resident, stood over a microscope in the basement lab. Her green scrubs were wrinkled, her ponytail fraying, and her eyes burned with 20 hours of fatigue. To the staff, Alexis was just the difficult resident, the one who asked too many questions and didn't know her place. She adjusted the slide, her hands moving with a speed and stability that betrayed decades of elite training. She wasn't looking for the flu, she was looking for a ghost. "Harper," a voice called out. It was Dr. Evans, the chief of surgery, looking bewildered as he held up a patient file. "That diagnosis you made on the ICU patient in bed 4. The drug-resistant sepsis. How did you catch that?" "The blood cultures were negative." Alexis didn't look up from her microscope. "Pattern recognition, Dr. Evans?" "Just a hunch." "A hunch." Evans lowered his voice, stepping closer. "You ordered a quarantine protocol that hasn't been used since the Ebola scare. You bypassed the attending. You're playing with fire, Alexis. If the board finds out you authorized those tests on the hospital's dime, then the patient lives," Alexis said, her voice flat. "Is there a problem?" Evans sighed, shaking his head. "The problem is the merger. The board is looking for excuses to trim staff. Don't give them one." At 8 a.m., the atmosphere in the hospital shifted from exhaustion to terror. The automatic doors slid open and Victor Pemberton strode in. As the chairman of the board, he didn't walk, he marched. He was obsessed with the hospital's stock value and the upcoming merger, viewing patients merely as overhead costs. "Why is the trauma bay cluttered?" Victor barked, his eyes scanning the floor not for cleanliness but for liability. "And why are we burning budget on isolation units for non-critical cases?" He cornered Alexis near the nurse's station. She was reviewing charts, blocking his path to the elevators. "You," Victor sneered, looking down at her generic hospital ID. "Dr. Harper. I saw the requisition forms. You're ordering level 4 biohazard gear for a standard infection. Do you think money grows on trees?" "It's not a standard infection, sir," Alexis replied, meeting his gaze. She was 5'5", dwarfed by his looming frame, but she stood with a rigidity that was purely military. "The mortality rate is—" "I don't care about the rate," Victor interrupted, loud enough for the lobby to hear. "I care about the merger. You are scaring the investors with this outbreak nonsense. You're a resident. You're here to learn, not to bankrupt me. One more unauthorized test and you're fired." Alexis watched him walk away. Her hand drifted to her pocket, brushing against the encrypted military comms device she kept hidden. "If only you knew," she thought. "I'm not here to save your money. I'm here to save your city." 2 days later, the hunch became a crisis. A black SUV screeched into the ambulance bay. Security details swarmed the entrance. The patient was the daughter of the Secretary of Defense, admitted with a high fever and mysterious, necrotic lesions. Victor Pemberton descended from his office, panicked. "Get her to the VIP suite. No press, no leaks. We treat her and discharge her by morning. I will not have a high-profile death jeopardize this merger." Alexis stood by the gurney as the girl was wheeled in. She saw what the others missed: the specific discoloration of the veins, the way the girl clawed at her throat. It was the same pathogen Alexis had hunted in Syria. Stop! Alexis shouted, physically blocking the double doors to the VIP wing. Victor's face twisted in rage. Move aside, Harper. If you move her, you spread the infection, Alexis said, locking the wheels of the gurney. This is a bioweaponized strain. She stays in quarantine. Security! Victor roared, pointing a trembling finger at her. Call the police. I want this woman arrested for assault and trespassing. As the sirens wailed in the distance, Alexis didn't move. She stood between the corrupt chairman and the patient, waiting for the war to begin. The inciting incision was wrong. It was a fraction of a millimeter off, but to the trained eye of Dr. Alexis Harper, it might as well have been a chaotic slash across a map of hostile territory. Retractor, barked Dr. Salinger, the attending surgeon who treated the operating room like his personal kingdom and the residents like serfs. He was sweating, his hands jittery from too much caffeine and too little sleep. Suction. I can't see the bleed. Alexis stood at the edge of the sterile field, her hands clasped behind her back in a pose that was less deferential student and more observing officer. She wasn't supposed to speak. As a first-year resident at Mercy General, she was the lowest form of life in the hospital hierarchy. She was meant to be seen, not heard, and certainly not obeyed. But the monitor was beginning to whine a low, rhythmic warning. The patient's pressure was dropping. You missed the arterial branch, doctor, Alexis said, her voice cutting through the panic in the room with the cool, metallic precision of a scalpel. If you cauterize there, you'll necrotize the tissue. You need to clamp the inferior vessel first. Salinger froze, his eyes snapping up above his mask. Excuse me? Did I ask for a consult from the peanut gallery, Harper? No, sir, Alexis replied, her gaze steady. But the patient is crashing. BP is 80/40. You have about 10 seconds before he codes. Salinger hesitated. His ego was wrestling with the terrifying reality of the beeping monitor. Finally, he cursed under his breath and adjusted his angle, finding the vessel exactly where Alexis had said it would be. The bleeding stopped. The monitor settled into a steady rhythm. The room exhaled, but the tension remained, thick and suffocating. Later, in the scrub room, Salinger ripped his mask off and turned on her. You made me look incompetent in there. I helped you save a life, Alexis said, scrubbing the iodine from her hands. She didn't flinch as he loomed over her. You're a resident, Harper. You're here to learn, not to lecture. One more stunt like that and I'll have you scrubbing bedpans in geriatrics. Do you understand? Understood, she lied. She didn't care about Salinger's ego. She didn't care about the residency program. She was Lieutenant Colonel Alexis Harper, a specialist in biowarfare and viral containment for the Pentagon, and she was currently deep undercover in a war zone that smelled of antiseptic rather than gunpowder. Her true mission began 3 hours later, during the graveyard shift lull. While the other residents dozed in the on-call room, Alexis moved through the darkened corridors with the silent, predatory grace of a woman accustomed to stalking targets in hostile terrain. Her destination wasn't a patient's room, but the server farm in the basement. The room hummed with the electric heat of data processing. It was locked, naturally, but the keypad was a joke compared to the encryption she'd cracked in Damascus. A simple bypass algorithm on her phone turned the light from red to green in 6 seconds. Inside, the blue light of the servers cast long, ghostly shadows against the walls. Alexis sat at a terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She wasn't looking for medical records. She was looking for what was missing. Over the last 3 months, 6 patients had died at Mercy General under suspicious circumstances: rapid organ failure, high fevers, and resistance to all known antibiotics. On the official books, they were listed as cardiac arrests or pneumonia. But Alexis knew better. She bypassed the hospital's firewall and dug into the deleted cache. There it was. The pathology reports. Patient 04-99, bacterial cultures positive. Strain unknown. Patient 05-12, bacterial cultures positive. Highly aggressive. Status: file purged by Admin V, Pemberton. Victor, she whispered, the blue light reflecting in her tired eyes. You aren't just cutting costs. You're burying bodies. She downloaded the encrypted files to a secure drive. The hospital administration was covering up a nosocomial outbreak of a superbug to protect their stock price before a merger. It was biological negligence on a scale that qualified as domestic terrorism. She had the proof, but she needed to find the source before the next victim walked through the doors. The sun rose on a hospital that felt less like a place of healing and more like a ticking bomb. At 8 a.m., the bomb arrived in a 3-piece Italian suit. Victor Pemberton, the chairman of the board, was conducting his morning inspection, which mostly involved terrorizing the staff about budget overruns. He moved through the ICU like a shark in a waiting pool, flanked by nervous administrators. Alexis was at the nurse's station, reviewing the sterilization logs, when Victor stopped directly in front of an open supply closet. "What is this?" Victor demanded, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. He pointed a manicured finger at a box of single-use particulate respirators. "I signed a memo last week switching us to the reusable N95s. Why are we still buying these?" The charge nurse, a timid woman named Sarah, stammered. "Mr. Pemberton, the reusable ones? The seals are failing after 3 washes. The infection rate in the burn unit is climbing. We need the disposables for safety." "Safety?" Victor laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Safety is a luxury we can't afford right now. We are bleeding cash. Every box of these masks is money out of my pocket. Get rid of them." "We can't do that," Alexis said. She hadn't meant to speak. It was the soldier in her, the officer who couldn't stand by and watch a commander issue a suicide order. She stepped out from behind the desk, clutching a clipboard to her chest to hide the shaking of her hands, not from fear but from the adrenaline of suppressed rage. Victor turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he took in her wrinkled scrubs and the messy ponytail. "Excuse me? Who are you?" "Dr. Harper," Alexis said, her voice ringing clear in the sudden silence of the hallway. "First-year resident. And the nurse is right. The reusable masks you ordered aren't rated for viral pathogens. If you swap them out, you're violating CDC protocols and OSHA safety standards. You'll save $3,000 on masks and spend $3 million on lawsuits when the staff gets sick." The hallway went deathly silent. Even the heart monitors seemed to quiet down. Victor took a step closer to her, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and old money. "Dr. Harper," Victor sneered, reading her badge. "Let me explain how the real world works since you're clearly still living in med school fantasy land. I don't care about OSHA. I care about the bottom line. This is my building. These are my employees. And if I say we use napkins and duct tape, you will say, 'Yes, sir.'" "Not if it kills the patients," Alexis countered, locking eyes with him. She saw the flash of uncertainty in his gaze. He wasn't used to defiance. He was used to fear. Victor's face contorted. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a hiss that only she could hear. "You are a very small cog in a very expensive machine, Harper. Do not think for a second that I won't crush you if you squeak too loud. Consider this your first and final warning." He turned on his heel and stormed off, his entourage scrambling to keep up. The charge nurse looked at Alexis with a mixture of awe and horror. "Dr. Harper, you shouldn't have done that. He fires people for looking at him wrong." "Someone had to," Alexis murmured, watching Victor disappear around the corner. She touched the hidden pocket where the stolen data drive sat against her hip. He had no idea. He thought he was threatening a resident. He didn't realize he had just declared war on the U.S. military. But as Alexis turned back to her charts, the PA system crackled to life, interrupting the morning calm. "Code Blue Trauma Bay 1. Code Blue Trauma Bay 1. ETA 2 minutes. Incoming VIP transport." Alexis felt a cold chill run down her spine. The pattern she had seen in the deleted files, the timeline of infection, suggested the bacteria had a 48-hour incubation period. The hospital was overdue for another case. And if her intel was right, the VIP coming through those doors wasn't just any patient. It was someone whose death couldn't be buried in a server room. The ambulance bay doors hissed open, admitting a gust of rain and the chaotic symphony of a medical emergency. The screech of tires was immediately swallowed by the shouting of paramedics as they unloaded a stretcher. The energy in the room spiked, shifting from the low hum of routine care to the frantic high-wire tension of a code blue. "Female 22 found unconscious in her dorm," the lead paramedic yelled, his voice cracking over the din. "Temp is 105. BP is crashing. She seized twice on the way over. We can't get a line in. Her veins are blowing out as fast as we stick them." Alexis stood near the trauma cart, gloved and ready, but she was shoved aside by Dr. Salinger and a phalanx of senior residents. Usually she would step back, observing from the shadows, but something about the paramedics' report triggered an alarm bell in the back of her mind. Veins blowing out? Eye fever? It was too aggressive for meningitis, too rapid for standard sepsis. Then she saw the patient's face as the gurney rushed past. The girl was pale, her skin slick with sweat, but it was the darkening, spiderweb-like tracks beneath the skin of her neck that made Alexis's blood run cold. "Clear the way," Salinger shouted. "Get her into Trauma 1. Before the doors to the trauma room could even swing shut, the hospital's automatic glass entryway slid open again. This time it wasn't medical staff. It was Victor Pemberton, flanked by the hospital's head of security and a frantic-looking public relations officer. Victor wasn't looking at the patient. He was looking at his phone, his face a mask of calculated panic. "I want a total media blackout," Victor hissed at the PR officer, marching right into the sterile zone of the ER in his expensive suit. "Do you hear me? If TMZ gets wind that General Vance's daughter is dying in my hospital before the merger is signed, I will have your head on a pike." Alexis froze. "Vance." She looked back at the trashing patient. It wasn't just any 22-year-old. It was Chloe Vance, the daughter of General Thomas Vance, the Secretary of Defense, and Alexis's direct commanding officer at the Pentagon. The stakes didn't just rise, they skyrocketed. If this was a targeted bioweapon attack on the Secretary's family, this wasn't just a medical emergency, it was an act of war. "Mr. Pemberton, please, you can't be in here," the charge nurse pleaded, trying to herd the executive back. "I go where I please," Victor snapped, pushing past her. He stood at the threshold of the trauma room, watching the doctors cut away Chloe's shirt to attach EKG leads. He didn't look concerned, he looked annoyed. "Stabilize her and get her up to the presidential suite immediately. I don't want her down here with the common element. It looks bad." "She's unstable, sir," Salinger yelled over the monitor's frantic beeping. "We can't move her." "I don't care about your medical opinion, Salinger," Victor retorted. "I care about optics. Her father is on a secure line right now. If she dies in a public ER next to a gunshot victim, we lose our funding. Get her upstairs. Now." Alexis slipped into the trauma room, ignored by the shouting men. She moved to the foot of the bed, her eyes locking onto Chloe's exposed arm. The nurses were struggling to find a vein, but Alexis saw what they were missing. The tissue around the injection sites wasn't just bruising, it was liquefying. She leaned in closer, inhaling sharply. Underneath the smell of rubbing alcohol and fear, there was a faint, sickly sweet scent. Bitter almonds and copper. It was the signature. Alexis's mind raced back to a classified briefing in a subterranean bunker in Virginia 3 years ago. Project Thanatos. A genetically modified strain of necrotic bacteria designed to mimic rapid-onset sepsis, resistant to all known broad-spectrum antibiotics. It was supposed to have been destroyed. But here it was, eating General Vance's daughter alive in a Chicago hospital. "Stop trying to stick her," Alexis said, her voice low but urgent. Salinger whipped his head around. "Harper, get out." "Look at the capillary refill," Alexis insisted, ignoring him and pointing to the girl's nail beds. They were turning a deep, violently dark purple. "And look at the petechiae on her chest. This isn't meningitis. It's a hemorrhagic pathogen. If you move her to the presidential suite, you're going to contaminate the entire ventilation system of the upper floors." Victor stepped into the room, his face purple with rage. "You again? I thought I told you to learn your place." "Her place is outside," Salinger snarled. "Get out, Harper, before I have security drag you out." "She needs vancomycin and immediate isolation," Alexis said, holding her ground, her eyes flicking between the dying girl and the corrupt chairman. "If you move her, you kill her. And you kill anyone who breathes the air on the top floor." Victor laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You're delusional. It's a fever. Salinger, prep the transport. I want her upstairs in 5 minutes." Alexis backed away as the orderlies moved in to obey Victor's command. She watched as they prepared to wheel the girl, a biological time bomb, into the heart of the hospital's VIP wing. Victor checked his watch, worried about his schedule, oblivious to the fact that he had just signed a death warrant for his prize patient. Alexis slipped out of the trauma room, her heart hammering against her ribs. They wouldn't listen to a resident. Logic wouldn't work. Protocol wouldn't work. She needed proof. And she needed it before Chloe Vance's heart stopped. As the elevator doors closed on Victor and the patient, Alexis turned on her heel and sprinted toward the service stairs. She had to get to the basement lab. She had to run the blood sample she had swiped from the discarded gauze in the trauma bin when no one was looking. But if she was right about the bug, she had less than an hour before the toxin breached Chloe's brain barrier, and before Victor Pemberton realized exactly what the difficult resident had just stolen. The basement pathology lab was a graveyard of cold steel and humming refrigeration units, hidden deep beneath the manicured lobby of Mercy General. It was off limits to residents without a requisition form, but the electronic lock on the door had yielded to Alexis's decryption tool in under 3 seconds. She worked in the dark, illuminated only by the harsh white beam of the microscope. Her hands, usually steady enough to defuse improvised explosives, trembled slightly as she smeared the blood sample from the stolen gauze onto a glass slide. She didn't use the standard gram stain. That would be useless. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small vial she had smuggled in from her off-site kit, a reactive agent designed specifically to identify synthetic pathogens. She applied a single drop. She waited. If the sample turned blue, it was a standard staph infection, and she was just a paranoid resident who had assaulted a superior. If it turned a violent, fluorescent orange, she was right, and everyone in the building was in mortal danger. Alexis leaned into the eyepiece. "Damn it," she whispered into the silence. The slide wasn't just orange, it was glowing like a flare. The bacteria were swarming, consuming the healthy cells with a terrifying, predatory efficiency. It was the ghost bacteria, Project Thanatos. It had no cell wall for antibiotics to attack, making it effectively invisible to the hospital's standard screening protocols. It didn't just kill, it erased. She grabbed the slide and the printed analysis report. The timestamps on the cellular decay showed that Chloe Vance didn't have days. She had hours. The toxin was already crossing the blood-brain barrier. If they didn't administer a high-grade experimental antiviral immediately, the Secretary of Defense's daughter would bleed out internally before the sun went down. Alexis sprinted for the service elevator, bypassing the crowded lobby. She needed someone with authority. She needed Dr. Evans, the chief of surgery. He was weak-willed, but he was a doctor first. If he saw the data, he couldn't ignore it. She found Evans in the scrub room on the 4th floor, staring blankly at his reflection in the mirror. He looked aged, the weight of the pending merger and Victor's budget cuts carving deep lines into his face. "Chief," Alexis said, bursting in. She didn't wait for permission to speak. She slammed the report onto the counter next to the sink. "You need to look at this. Now." Evans jumped, spinning around. "Harper? You're supposed to be—" "I'm supposed to be quiet," Alexis cut in, her voice hard. "But you have a patient in the VIP suite who is dying of a weaponized bacterial strain. Look at the decay rate, Dr. Evans. Standard antibiotics are feeding it. If you don't lock down that wing and switch her treatment to polymyxin E and isolate the ventilation, she's dead." Evans looked at the report. His eyes scanned the numbers and the color drained from his face. This is impossible. These markers. I haven't seen anything like this since the classified briefings you ignored," Alexis said. "It's real. And it's upstairs." Evans reached for the phone on the wall, his hand shaking. "I have to call the CDC. We have to." "Put the phone down." The voice came from the doorway, smooth and deadly. Victor Pemberton stood there, leaning against the frame, cleaning his fingernails with a small file. He didn't look at Evans. He looked directly at Alexis, his eyes filled with a cold, reptilian boredom. "Mr. Pemberton," Evans stammered, the receiver hovering halfway to his ear. "Dr. Harper has found, there's evidence of a superbug. We have to alert the authorities." Victor walked into the room, took the phone from Evans's hand, and gently placed it back on the cradle. Then he picked up the report Alexis had printed. He didn't read it. He tore it in half, then in quarters. He dropped the confetti into the trash bin. "There is no superbug," Victor said calmly. "There is a severe flu case in a high-profile patient. And there is a merger signing in 3 hours that will make us all very rich. Do you know what ruins mergers, Dr. Evans? Panic. Quarantine tapes. News vans in the parking lot." "Victor, she's right," Evans tried to argue, though his voice was thin. "The data. The data is fabricated by a disgruntled first-year resident who is desperate for attention," Victor said, turning his full attention to Alexis. He stepped close, crowding her against the scrub sinks. "I checked your file, Harper. You're aggressive, insubordinate. And now you're forging lab results to incite hysteria. I am trying to save her life," Alexis said, her jaw tight. She measured the distance to his throat. It would be so easy to drop him. But she couldn't break cover. "Not yet." "You are trying to sabotage my deal," Victor hissed, his face inches from hers. "Hear me clearly. If you breathe a word of this ghost bacteria to anyone else, if you so much as whisper it to a janitor, I will not only fire you. I will have your medical license revoked for gross misconduct. I will sue you for everything you will ever own. I will make sure you never work in healthcare again." He straightened his tie, smoothing the silk. Now get out of my sight. Go check bedpans. Leave the medicine to the adults. Alexis stared at him, memorizing his face for the tribunal that would eventually come. She turned and walked out, leaving Evan staring shamefully at the floor. She was halfway down the hall when the overhead speakers chimed with a sound that stopped every heart on the floor. It wasn't a page. It was the specific rhythmic alarm of a cardiac crash cart. Beep 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 beep. Code Blue Presidential Suite, the operator's voice cracked. Code Blue. Patient is seizing. Alexis looked at the elevator. Victor had blocked the treatment. Evans had folded. The system had failed. She felt the weight of the encrypted comms device in her pocket, but she knew calling for backup would take too long. She was the only thing standing between Chloe Vance and a body bag. She took a breath, turned away from the stairs, and started running toward the VIP wing. Protocol was dead. It was time to operate. The crash cart wheels screeched against the linoleum as the team swarmed bed 4 in the ICU. Chloe Vance was no longer a political asset or a VIP. She was a body in revolt. Her back arched off the mattress, the monitors screaming a discordant symphony of failure. V-fib. Salinger yelled, charging the paddles. Clear. The jolt lifted Chloe's body, but the monitor line remained stubbornly flat. Again. Charge to 200. Stop, Alexis commanded. She didn't shout, but her voice cut through the chaos like a whip crack. She stepped into the circle, grabbing Salinger's wrist before he could deliver a second, futile shock. Look at the monitor. It's not V-fib. It's pulseless electrical activity caused by toxic shock. You shock her again, you fry the only heart muscle she has left. Salinger looked at the monitor, then at Alexis, sweat dripping into his eyes. She's flatlining Harper. What do you want me to do, pray? Push epinephrine and start a peripheral dopamine drip, Alexis ordered, her hands moving fast. She grabbed a laryngoscope. And get me an intubation kit. Her airway is closing. The necrosis is hitting the laryngeal tissue. For a second, the room hesitated. The hierarchy of medicine dictated they ignore the resident. But the terrified silence of the grave was filling the room, and Alexis was the only one not shaking. Salinger stepped back. Alexis worked with a terrifying efficiency. She slid the blade into the girl's throat, bypassing the swelling tissue, and secured the airway in seconds. Bag her, she ordered a nurse. Keep the oxygen at 100%. The monitor pinged. A single weak beat. Then another. A rhythm, thready and desperate, but there. She's back, the nurse breathed, looking at Alexis with wide eyes. Alexis didn't celebrate. She looked at the blood drying on the girl's lips. The pathogen was airborne now. Every cough, every exhalation from the patient was pumping microscopic death into the room. She looked up at the ceiling vents. The hospital's HVAC system was a connected loop. If this room wasn't sealed, the ghost bacteria would be circulating in the maternity ward and the cafeteria within 20 minutes. Everybody out, Alexis said, her voice dropping an octave. What? Salinger blinked. I said get out. Alexis shoved Salinger toward the double doors. All non-essential personnel evacuate the wing immediately. This is a biohazard level 4 event. Go. She didn't wait for them to argue. She grabbed the red emergency phone on the wall, the one connected to the building's infrastructure. She punched in a code she wasn't supposed to know, overriding the central security panel. Clack thud. The heavy magnetic locks on the ICU's main double doors slammed home. The steel fire shutters rolled down over the observation windows, sealing the 6-bed wing off from the rest of the hospital. Inside the bubble, it was just Alexis, the unconscious patient, and 2 terrified nurses who hadn't made it to the exit in time. Dr. Harper, what did you do? One of the nurses whispered, backing against the wall. We're trapped. We're quarantined, Alexis corrected, checking Chloe's 4. And we're keeping this thing contained. A moment later, the heavy doors shook. Someone was pounding on them from the outside. Open this door. Immediately. It was Victor. His voice was muffled by the thick fire-rated steel, but the rage was unmistakable. Through the small reinforced glass window in the door, Alexis could see him. He wasn't alone. 2 burly hospital security guards stood behind him, hands on their batons. Alexis walked to the window. She pressed the intercom button. Negative, Mr. Pemberton. The wing is under biocontainment. No one enters, no one leaves. You have lost your mind. Victor screamed, his face pressed against the glass, distorting his features into a grotesque mask. That represents a liability nightmare. I have a private ambulance en route to take her to the Westlake facility. We are moving her out of here before the press gets wind of the condition. Moving her breaks containment, Alexis said calmly. If you wheel her through the lobby, you expose 300 people. If you put her in an ambulance, you kill the paramedics. She stays here. I am the chairman of this board. Victor roared, spit flying against the glass. I am ordering you to open this door. If you don't, I will have security break it down, and I will personally see to it that you are arrested for kidnapping and endangerment. He signaled the guards. One of them produced a heavy crowbar and jammed it into the gap between the magnetic doors. Don't do it, Victor, Alexis warned, her hand drifting to the pocket where she kept her tactical pen, a flimsy weapon against armed guards, but she knew where to strike. If you breach this seal, you're signing a death warrant for this city. Break it, Victor commanded the guards. Metal screeched against metal. The doors groaned. The magnetic seal held, but for how long? Alexis looked back at the patient. Chloe was stable but fading. The antidote was hours away, assuming the Pentagon received her encrypted distress signal. Victor locked eyes with her through the glass, smiling cruelly as the doors began to flex. You think you're a hero, Harper? You're just a girl in a locked room. And I have the key. He pulled out his phone and dialed 3 numbers. He wasn't calling a doctor. He was calling the police. Dispatch? This is Victor Pemberton at Mercy General. I have a deranged employee holding a patient hostage in the ICU. She's dangerous. Send everyone. Alexis watched him make the call, her heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. The siege had begun, and she was on the wrong side of the law. The doors groaned again, a loud crack echoing through the sealed ward as the crowbar gained leverage. The seal was breaking. The crowbar struck the steel frame again, sending a jarring vibration through the floor that rattled the 4-stand next to Chloe's bed. Inside the sealed ICU, the air was heavy with the silence of held breath, punctuated only by the rhythmic whoosh-click of the ventilator. Dr. Harper, the nurse whispered, her hands trembling as she adjusted the patient's fluid line. They're going to get in. What do? We wait, Alexis said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She stood with her back to the glass, shielding the patient's vitals from Victor's prying eyes. Every minute we keep those doors closed is a minute the pathogen stays contained. Just keep her stable. Outside, the brute force approach was failing. The magnetic locks were rated to withstand a siege, designed for riot control. Victor Pemberton threw his hands up, shouting something at the security guards that was muffled by the thick glass. He looked at the crowbar, then at the keypad, and finally, a look of smug, malicious realization crossed his face. He didn't need to break the door. He owned the building. Alexis watched as Victor pulled a tablet from his briefcase. He tapped the screen furiously, accessing the administrative mainframe. He's overriding the system, Alexis realized. She lunged for the manual deadbolt, but it was too late. The overhead lights in the hallway flashed red. A computerized voice droned, administrative override accepted. Security protocols disengaged. There was a loud pneumatic hiss as the magnetic seals died. The heavy doors didn't just unlock. They slid open with a smooth, mechanical obedience. The barrier was gone. Seize her. Victor screamed, stepping over the threshold. The air pressure shift was palpable, a rush of sterile hallway air mixing with the contaminated atmosphere of the ICU. Alexis didn't retreat. She stepped forward, placing herself physically between the security team and the patient. Stop, she commanded, holding up a hand. You are entering a hot zone. If you touch this patient, you are violating federal biosafety laws. I am the law in this hospital. Victor roared. He grabbed Alexis by the arm, his grip bruising. Get her out of here. Drag her out. 2 security guards moved in. Alexis tensed. Her training screamed at her to drop her center of gravity, to strike the brachial plexus, to disable the threats. She could have incapacitated all 3 men in under 4 seconds. But she couldn't. To fight back with military precision would blow her cover before the Pentagon extraction team arrived. She had to play the role of the helpless resident. She let them grab her. You're making a mistake, Victor. Alexis shouted as the guards yanked her away from the bed. She needs isolation. If you move her to the VIP suite, you're killing her. Get her out. Victor spat, shoving her toward the open doors. They dragged her backward, her heels skidding on the linoleum. They hauled her out of the ICU and into the main corridor, where a crowd of terrified staff and curious onlookers had gathered. The spectacle was public, humiliating, and exactly what Victor wanted. He wanted to make an example of her. Victor followed her out, his face a mask of purple, unchecked rage. He signaled the guards to stop in the center of the hallway. "You wanted an audience." "Let go of me," Alexis said, wrenching her arm free for a moment to adjust her scrubs. She stood tall, breathing hard, surrounded by the staring eyes of the people she had worked with for months. Victor stepped into her personal space, his chest heaving. He raised his hand, pointing a manicured finger inches from her nose, his eyes bulging with fury. "You are a liability and a fraud." Victor screamed, his voice echoing off the walls. "I gave you a job. I gave you a chance. And you repay me by hijacking my facility and assaulting my staff." "I was saving a life," Alexis said, her voice icy and precise, cutting through his hysteria. "You were grandstanding." Victor bellowed, spraying spittle. "You're finished, Harper. I will see to it that you never practice medicine again. I'm going to bury you under so many lawsuits you'll be paying me until you die." He turned to the crowd, playing to the gallery. "Look at her. This is what happens when you forget who signs your checks." Alexis didn't flinch. She stared at him, memorizing the veins popping in his forehead, the sweat on his upper lip. But over Victor's shoulder, she saw the main lobby doors swing open. Blue lights flashed against the glass. The heavy tread of police boots thundered on the floor tiles. "Officer!" Victor shouted, waving frantically at the incoming policeman. "Over here. This is the woman. Arrest her immediately." The police officer, a tall man with a grim expression, marched down the hall, his hand resting on his handcuffs. He looked from the screaming executive to the defiant resident in dirty scrubs. Victor smirked, the triumph ugly on his face. "Get her out of my building. Now." As the officer reached for his belt, Alexis didn't look at the handcuffs. She looked directly into the security camera mounted on the ceiling above them, and for the briefest second, she tapped a rhythmic, silent code against her thigh. Signal sent. The officer grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around. The cold metal of the cuffs touched her skin. But before the ratchet could click shut, a sound pierced the air, not a siren but a screech of static that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Officer, thank God you're here," Victor Pemberton exclaimed, smoothing his suit jacket with a gesture that was theatrical in its relief. He pointed a trembling finger at Alexis, who stood motionless in the center of the hallway, surrounded by the hushed whispers of the hospital staff. "This woman is dangerous. She's having a psychotic break." The police officer, a broad-shouldered man with a nameplate that read Miller, looked between the immaculately dressed chairman and the young woman in stained scrubs. He saw exactly what Victor wanted him to see: authority versus instability. "What exactly happened here, sir?" Officer Miller asked, his hand resting instinctively on his belt. "She locked herself in the ICU with a critical patient." Victor lied effortlessly, his voice pitching up to ensure the gathered crowd heard every word. "She barricaded the doors. She was ranting about government conspiracies and biological weapons. She held a dying girl hostage, officer. We had to override the security locks just to get in." He took a step closer to the cop, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough to carry. "She's a first-year resident. The pressure. I think she just snapped. She assaulted me when I tried to intervene. You need to get her out of here before she hurts someone else." Alexis didn't interrupt. She didn't scream that he was lying. In her line of work, panic was an admission of guilt. Instead, she watched Officer Miller. She analyzed his stance, his grip, and his line of sight. He wasn't a bad cop. He was just a confused man walking into a carefully constructed narrative. "Ma'am," Officer Miller said, stepping toward her. His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "I need you to step away from the medical staff and keep your hands where I can see them." "Officer," Alexis said, her voice calm and terrifyingly level. "The man behind you is attempting to move a patient with a highly contagious Class A pathogen into a public wing. If he moves that gurney, he is endangering the lives of everyone in this city." Victor let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "See? I told you. Pathogens. Classic. She's delusional. Just arrest her." Miller's face hardened. The mention of contagion made him nervous, but the confident, suit-wearing executive outweighed the ramblings of a disheveled resident. He made his choice. "Ma'am, turn around," Miller ordered, unclipping the handcuffs from his belt. "You are being detained for disorderly conduct and trespassing." "You're making a mistake," Alexis said softly. She didn't resist as Miller grabbed her wrist, twisting her arm behind her back. The move was standard police protocol, pain compliance. It was amateur compared to what she had endured in SEER training, but she let her body go limp, feigning submission. "You have the right to remain silent," Miller recited, the metallic click-click-click of the first cuff ratcheting onto her left wrist echoing in the silent hallway. Victor watched with a smirk of pure, unadulterated triumph. He crossed his arms, looking down his nose at her. "I'll make sure the medical board hears about this by morning, Harper. You'll be lucky if you can get a job driving a taxi when I'm done with you." As Miller reached for her right hand, Alexis looked up. She wasn't looking at Victor. She wasn't looking at the officer. Her gaze locked onto the black, domed security camera mounted on the ceiling tile directly above them. The small red LED blinked steadily, recording everything. The hospital's security feed was a closed circuit, but Alexis knew something Victor didn't. The Pentagon's Watchtower algorithm constantly scanned domestic surveillance grids for biometric hits on high-value assets. She was a high-value asset. With her free hand, just before Miller grabbed it, she tapped her wrist against her thigh. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. It looked like a nervous tick, a fidget of a scared girl about to go to jail. But to the AI monitoring the feed in a server farm 300 miles away, it was an SOS distress beacon combined with an identity verification code. Subject: Lieutenant Colonel Alexis Harper. Status: compromised. Location: hostile. Request: immediate extraction. "Give me your other hand," Miller commanded, oblivious to the signal. Alexis allowed him to pull her right arm back. She felt the cold steel circle her wrist. The mechanism clicked shut. She was bound. "Let's go," Miller said, shoving her forward. Victor laughed, a sound of pure victory. "Get that trash out of my building." Alexis was led away, her head high, her eyes fixed on the camera lens as they passed beneath it. She had sent the call. Now she just had to pray that someone was listening before Victor opened the doors to the ICU and let the plague out. Officer Miller's thumb hovered over the transmit button on his shoulder radio. He was opening his mouth to call in the arrest, to utter the code that would officially book Alexis Harper into the system and drag her out of the fight. Victor Pemberton watched with a gleaming, predatory satisfaction. His chest puffed out like a rooster who had just won a territory dispute. Then the air in the corridor shattered. It wasn't a siren. It wasn't a beep. It was a high-pitched digital screech that erupted from Officer Miller's radio with enough decibels to make the gathered crowd wince and cover their ears. It sounded like two pieces of metal tearing each other apart. Miller clawed at his chest, frantically trying to turn the volume knob down, but the screeching persisted, bypassing the manual controls. It was a frequency override, a brute force hijacking of the public safety bandwidth. Then, just as abruptly as it had started, the noise cut out. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and trembling. Unit 4 Alpha, freeze. The voice that boomed from the tiny speaker on Miller's chest wasn't the bored, nasal tone of the precinct dispatcher. It was deep, crystal clear, and carried a resonance of authority that made the hair on the back of Miller's neck stand up. It sounded like God speaking from a thundercloud. Miller froze, his hand shaking. "Dispatch? Who is this?" "This is General Thomas Vance, Secretary of Defense," the voice announced. The words echoed off the tiled walls. "You are interfering with a classified military operation. Do not take another step." Victor Pemberton's smug smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He stepped forward, waving his hand dismissively. "What is this? Some kind of prank? Officer, turn that thing off. She's probably got a friend hacking the line." Silence. The command from the radio was so loud, so visceral, that Victor actually flinched, stepping back as if he'd been slapped. "Officer Miller," General Vance continued, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "Look at the prisoner in your custody." Miller hesitated, his heart hammering against his ribs. Slowly he turned his head. He looked at Alexis. She hadn't moved. She stood with her hands cuffed behind her back, but the slump of the defeated resident was gone. Her chin was up. Her shoulders were squared. She was looking at the radio with an expression of grim expectation. "The individual you are detaining is not a resident," Vance stated. "That is Lieutenant Colonel Alexis Harper, Chief Virologist for U.S. Army Medical Command. She is the highest-ranking officer in your sector." A gasp rippled through the crowd of nurses and orderlies. Miller looked at the woman in the stained scrubs, then down at the handcuffs, his face draining of color. "Lieutenant? Colonel? That's a lie." Victor shrieked, his voice cracking. He looked desperate now, sweat beading on his forehead. "She's a fraud. She's a lunatic. Officer, I order you to remove her." "Officer," the Secretary of Defense cut in, ignoring Victor completely. Who is the male voice screaming? Miller swallowed hard, his throat dry as sandpaper. That's Victor Pemberton, sir. The hospital chairman. Mr. Pemberton, Vance said. We have intercepted your order to move my daughter, Chloe Vance, from isolation. We have also recovered the pathology reports you attempted to delete from the server. You are knowingly exposing civilians to a weaponized biological agent to protect a financial merger. Victor stammered, looking around for support, but his security guards were slowly backing away from him. Officer Miller, listen to me very closely, the general commanded. The man shouting is the threat. The woman in scrubs is in charge. If you move Colonel Harper 1 inch closer to that exit, you will be charged with aiding and abetting an act of domestic terrorism. Uncuff her. Immediately. The hallway felt like a vacuum. Time seemed to suspend. Miller looked at Victor, the man in the expensive suit who was now trembling, and then at Alexis, the woman in dirty scrubs who radiated command. Miller made his choice. Back up, Miller barked at Victor, shoving the executive toward the wall. He spun Alexis around. His fingers fumbled with the key, shaking, but he found the lock. Click. The handcuffs fell away. Alexis didn't rub her wrists. She didn't waste a second. She reached out and took the radio microphone from Miller's shoulder, pressing the button with the familiarity of a soldier who had spent her life on comms. Harper here, she said, her voice steady. Colonel, Vance's voice softened, the father bleeding through the general. What is her status? Critical, sir. The containment is breached. I need tactical control of the facility to re-establish the perimeter and administer the prototype antiviral. You have command, Colonel, Vance confirmed. The National Guard is 10 minutes out. Until they arrive, this hospital is under martial law, and you are the acting commander. Do what you have to do. Copy that. Alexis released the button. She turned slowly to face Victor Pemberton. The exhausted resident was gone. In her place stood a predator who had just been let off the leash. Victor was pressed against the wall, his face a mask of pure terror. Now, Alexis, Colonel, let's be reasonable. I was just following protocol. Protocol just changed, Alexis said. She turned to Officer Miller. Officer, give me your handcuffs. Officer Miller stared at the handcuffs in his own palm as if they were a foreign object. The heavy steel felt different now, no longer a tool of routine law enforcement, but a weight of massive impending liability. He looked at Victor Pemberton, whose face had drained of its furious color to leave a pale, sweating mask of disbelief. Then he looked at Alexis, who stood rubbing the red chafing marks on her wrists, her expression carved from stone. Miller didn't hand the cuffs to Alexis. He understood the chain of command. He turned on his heel, facing the man in the bespoke Italian suit. You heard the general, Miller said, his voice rough. Turn around. Hands behind your back. Victor stumbled back, tripping over his own expensive loafers. Are you insane? You take orders from a radio? I am the chairman of this board. I sign your precinct's donation checks. If you touch me, I will have your badge melting in a furnace by noon. He spun toward the crowd of nurses and orderlies who were watching with wide, stunned eyes. You're all fired. Every single one of you who is standing there doing nothing. Security. Remove this officer. Remove this woman. The two security guards who had been ready to tackle Alexis moments ago didn't move. They looked at the terrified executive, then at the police officer, and finally at the ceiling where the voice of God had just come from. Slowly, almost in unison, they took a step back, holstering their batons. Mr. Pemberton, Miller said, stepping forward and grabbing Victor's wrist with considerably less gentleness than he had used on Alexis. You are being detained under Title 18 of the United States Code for reckless endangerment and negligence resulting in a bioterror threat. This is a mistake. Victor shrieked as the cuffs ratcheted tight, pinning his arms behind his back. The sound was sharp and final. I demand my lawyer. I demand. Get him out of my trauma corridor, Alexis interrupted. She didn't shout. She didn't even look at Victor. Her eyes were already scanning the hallway, assessing the tactical situation. Miller, put him in your squad car. Roll up the windows. If he coughs, do not open the door. He's been exposed to the breach. Miller nodded, shoving the protesting executive toward the exit. Yes, ma'am. Colonel. As Victor was dragged away, screaming threats that faded into the distance, silence crashed back into the hallway. The staff, Dr. Evans, the nurses, the residents who had mocked her, stared at Alexis. They didn't see the difficult first-year resident anymore. They saw a stranger. Alexis clapped her hands once, the sound sharp as a gunshot. Snap out of it. The staff jumped. This is no longer a civilian hospital, Alexis announced, her voice projecting clear and hard. This is a military containment zone. Dr. Evans. The chief of surgery blinked, looking terrified. Yes, doctor? I mean, Colonel? I am reinstating your authority over surgical teams, but you answer to me, Alexis ordered, walking back toward the open ICU doors. Shut down the HVAC system for the entire East Wing immediately. I want negative pressure established in this corridor within 3 minutes. If the vents stay open, the pathogen hits the maternity ward. Move. Evans scrambled for the maintenance phone. On it. Salinger. Alexis barked at the arrogant stripped attending. Here, Salinger stammered. Grab the crash cart and a hazmat suit. You're coming back inside with me. I need a central line in the patient and I need it done perfectly. If your hands shake, you leave the room. Am I clear? Crystal, Salinger said, grabbing the cart without a second thought. Sarah, Alexis pointed to the head nurse. Lock the elevators. No one comes up, no one goes down. I want security posted at the stairwells. Anyone trying to leave gets detained. We don't know who else Victor exposed. She didn't wait for acknowledgement. She turned and strode back into the contaminated ICU, grabbing a fresh gown and mask from the cart. The fear in the room had vanished, replaced by the frantic, focused energy of a combat unit. The staff wasn't asking questions anymore. They were following the only person who knew how to survive what was coming. Alexis reached Chloe's bedside. The monitors were erratic, the girl's vitals threadbare. The ghost bacteria had used the chaos of the confrontation to dig deeper. Salinger, central line, jugular approach, Alexis commanded, pulling a vial of experimental serum from her pocket, the one she had kept hidden for this exact moment. I'm initiating the antidote protocol. It's going to shock her system. Be ready to bag her. As Salinger prepped the needle, Alexis looked at the open door of the ICU. The seal was broken. The air had mixed. Victor was gone, but his damage remained. Just hold on, Chloe, Alexis whispered, injecting the serum into the foreport. The cavalry is here. 2 weeks later, the air in Mercy General tasted different. It no longer carried the metallic tang of fear or the stale, recycled scent of covered-up secrets. It smelled of bleach, fresh lilies in the lobby, and the crisp, undeniable scent of accountability. The frantic energy of the ghost bacteria outbreak had subsided into a diligent, orderly recovery. The CDC tents in the parking lot were being disassembled, the biohazard tape peeled away from the ICU doors. The infection was gone. Chloe Vance had walked out of the hospital 3 days ago, weak but alive, flanked by her father who had personally shaken the hand of every nurse on the floor. But the biggest change wasn't medical, it was administrative. In the staff break room, the television mounted on the wall played a local news loop on mute. The headline was bold and unforgiving. Hospital chairman indicted on federal charges. The footage showed Victor Pemberton, not in his Italian suit, but in an orange jumpsuit, trying to hide his face from the cameras as he was led into the federal courthouse. He was facing 20 counts of reckless endangerment, bioterrorism negligence, and fraud. The merger was dead and so was his career. Dr. Evans stood by the coffee machine, watching the screen with a grim satisfaction. He turned as the door opened, expecting a resident. He straightened immediately. Colonel. Alexis Harper stood in the doorway. The stained green scrubs, the messy ponytail, and the tired, rebellious eyes of the difficult resident were gone. In their place stood an officer of the United States Army. She was wearing her dress blues, the dark blue coat tailored perfectly, the light blue trousers with the gold stripe, and a rack of ribbons that told a story of a dozen war zones before she ever set foot in Chicago. The silver star gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The oak leaves of a lieutenant colonel sat on her shoulders. Dr. Evans, Alexis said, nodding. She held out a small, secure tablet. The CDC has signed off on the final decontamination protocols. The hospital is officially clear. My team is pulling out at 1,400 hours. Evans took the tablet, his hand steady now that the tyrant was gone. Thank you, Colonel. For everything. And I'm sorry. For not listening sooner. You listened when it mattered, Alexis said. That's what counts. Keep Salinger in check for me. He has good hands, he just needs to lose the ego. Evans chuckled. I think you scared the ego out of him for good. He's been scrubbing in on pro bono cases all week. Alexis picked up her cover, her formal hat, and placed it squarely on her head. Good. The mission is done. She turned and walked out of the break room, heading for the main lobby. She had expected to slip out the back, to vanish as quietly as she had arrived. That was the job. You enter as a ghost, you leave as a memory. But as she turned the corner into the main corridor, the same long hallway where Victor had screamed at her, where the police had cuffed her, where she had been humiliated in front of the world, she stopped. The hallway wasn't empty. It was lined on both sides with people. Nurses, orderlies, surgeons, janitors, and security guards. Dr. Salinger was there. The charge nurse Sarah was there. Even Officer Miller, who had returned to take a statement, stood near the doors. They weren't working. They were waiting. As Alexis took her first step down the corridor, the sound began. It started with Sarah, a single sharp clap. Then Salinger joined in. Then the orderlies. Within seconds, the entire corridor erupted in a thunderous, sustained standing ovation. It wasn't the polite applause of a golf tournament. It was the raucous, emotional cheering of survivors thanking the soldier who had pulled them out of the fire. Alexis felt a lump rise in her throat, a sensation she hadn't felt in years of combat. She kept her face neutral, her eyes forward, maintaining military bearing, but her pace slowed. She walked down the center of the aisle, the applause washing over her. She passed Officer Miller. He didn't clap. Instead, he snapped to attention and delivered a sharp, respectful salute. Alexis paused. She returned the salute, crisp and perfect. As you were, officer. She reached the sliding glass doors. The black government SUV was waiting at the curb, engine idling. The driver, a sergeant in fatigues, opened the back door. Alexis paused one last time, looking back at the hospital. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a stronghold she had secured. She had entered as a liability, a fraud, a difficult woman. She was leaving as a legend. She climbed into the back seat. The door thudded shut, sealing out the noise of the city. Good afternoon, Colonel, the driver said, pulling into traffic. General Vance sends his regards. He said to tell you excellent work on the containment. Thank you, Sergeant, Alexis said, looking out the window as the hospital faded into the distance. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, deactivating the Alexis Harper resident profile and wiping the device clean. Where to, ma'am? The Pentagon. Alexis looked at the new file that had just appeared on her secure server. It was a dossier. A grainy photo of a water treatment plant in Cambodia, and a chemical signature that matched a toxin thought to be extinct since the Cold War. She smiled, the thrill of the hunt returning. No, Sergeant, Alexis said, her eyes narrowing. Take me to the airfield. We have a plane to catch. Alexis Harper had to wait 2 weeks and stop a bioweapon just to get a little appreciation from her staff. I've spent hours crafting this story for you, and I'm just asking for 1 second of yours. Don't make me wait for my standing ovation. Subscribe right now, leave a like if you respect the hustle, and comment what you think Alexis's next mission should be. Don't leave me hanging in the hallway.